All right. Welcome everyone to our final CVI webinar of our 4-part series, which is 8 webinars in total. Today we'll be looking at approaches from the CVI Companion Guide, Early Intervention in Preschool, Application to Practice with both Deborah Chen and Elizabeth Hartman. Deborah Chen is a professor emerita at Early Childhood Special Education, Department of Special Education at California State University, Northridge. She coordinated the Early Childhood Special Education program, taught courses, and supervised student teachers in this specialization. Dr. Chen had been an early interventionist teacher and program administrator in programs serving children with visual impairments and multiple disabilities, including deaf-blindness. Elizabeth Hartman is an associate professor of education at LaSalle University and a co-lecturer of T560, Universal Design for Learning at Harvard's Graduate School of Education. In her research, she examines teacher implementation of UDL and how UDL is enacted to teach learners with multiple disabilities. She is a teacher of students with visual impairments and deaf-blindness. All right, Deb and Liz, take it away.
Thank you, Jen and Michael and Greg and everybody else at Patton for helping us, and also for Liz for her questions and answers and chat facilitation. I'm happy to be here again to follow up on application to practice for young children with CVI and additional disabilities. Oops. Sorry, I'm having a little trouble getting to the next slide.
Click on your slide once, and then you should be able to advance.
Click on my slide once. There, okay, thank you. So we're going to talk about team models and then communication and the communication matrix and how important child preferences are in intervention, as well as embedding objectives within the daily routines. Jen, Liz, sorry, would you please remind us about how to join the conversation?
Yes, hi, good afternoon, everyone. We really want to encourage you to engage throughout this webinar so you are actively involved. And to do that, we'd like for you to join in conversations with us. So I will be on what's called the back channel, just a place for us to chat during the presentation. And then throughout the presentation, there'll be specific times when we stop and ask you questions. So how you can engage with us is if you go down to the bottom, you'll see where that red box is, there's a Q&A button. You can click on that and you can comment, ask a question. You can choose to be anonymous or not. So we look forward to engaging with you.
Thank you, Liz. So as you have all learned or knew before, children with CVI are very complex learners, that the CVI may influence their vision as well as other developmental domains. And this really requires services from practitioners of different disciplines. And we know that the best outcomes for children and family are when we have coordinated and integrated services. So this is the first conversation topic. Reflect on the service delivery approach that your program uses to serve young children with CVI. How would you describe your team model? What works well and what is challenging? So post your answers and we'll get back in a couple of slides. We know that when children have CVI, there may be many practitioners on the educational team, and I've just put some of these down. The teacher certified in visual impairment, the orientation and mobility specialist, an early interventionist, and an early childhood special educator from a different discipline. Or there may be people who serve two roles: a teacher certified in deaf and hard of hearing specialization, speech and language pathologist, occupational therapist, physical therapist, With some preschoolers, a positive behavior support specialist. If the child is deaf-blind, there may be a deaf-blind specialist. If the child is in a preschool inclusion program, there may be the general educator. So you may have a variety of practitioners serving a child with CVI. Let's think about the different team models. The first diagram here is of the multidisciplinary team. IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, requires at least 2 different disciplines, multidisciplinary team, to assess and serve a child with a disability. So as you can see, each of these team members interact with the child and family, if it's a home visit, or the child and family and teacher, if it's a preschool. But they're working with the child separately and individually. There really isn't any communication or planning between team members. So although the child is getting in-depth expertise and one-on-one service, there may be gaps in the services or duplication of services, or there may be very different approaches to intervention. The next model is called the interdisciplinary model, which just means that there is communication among the professionals. So you can see those lines show you that there is collaboration, joint planning, joint assessment, maybe a synthesis of reports, but each of these team members are still working separately with the child or family in home visits or in the classroom if it's a preschool child. So some of the challenges may be the number of team members, and that also just the logistical issues of getting everyone together. With technology, this is a little easier to communicate and to really do some joint planning. The family or the teacher in the classroom may become sort of the hub person who has to share messages between team members. The last model that I want to talk about is actually 2 different models, but they have some similarities. The transdisciplinary model means there is communication and interaction across disciplines. So team members really share expertise and strategies. There is a lot of joint planning. Technology may be used, such as looking at videos with each other, as well as with the child and family. Now, if you think about a classroom, the classroom teacher may be the primary team member there in yellow. And the other team members may be consultants to help coach the teacher in different strategies. Or if you think of early intervention, the primary service provider model that's used in 30 different states has one team member as the main liaison with the child and family. Now, this means that the child and family may receive joint visits, so that other team members may have some hands-on time with the child and family if needed. But there is coordination of those services through a primary facilitator. And so there has to be a lot of trust and role release, as well as sharing. And of course, people need to be able to coach not only the family, but also the classroom teacher, and to coach each other. So based on that brief overview of these models, let's hear your comments. So as we know, children with CVI are very complex and very complicated. And from vision in the brain, Dutton and Lewick identified 3 different groups that children with CVI may fall into. The first is a group of children that have profound visual impairments and multiple disabilities. And then those that have functional vision and additional disabilities. And finally, those with functional vision who may achieve close to their academic level for their age. So today I'm really focusing on the first 2 groups, those with multiple disabilities as well as additional disabilities. Children with CVI may have difficulty recognizing facial expressions, understanding fast-paced speech, following fast-moving gestures. They have difficulty with auditory and visual clutter, attending, remembering, and planning, imitating or copying, using fine motor skills to identify, locate, and explore objects. So from just a few of these challenges, we can see how much communication development may be influenced, particularly if the child has multiple disabilities. We know that there are interconnections between developmental areas. So as you work with a child, consider how the targeted intervention area of development relates to other areas. And think about how you can help the child integrate learning across other areas. So we need to use a holistic or whole child approach, particularly when children have CVI and additional disabilities, in order for them to make sense of what they're learning. So I'm using communication as an example, but you can think about this for other targeted areas. Communication targets not only that interaction and receiving and sending messages and building language, but also social emotional skills, relationship with those the child is communicating with, the self-regulation of being able to monitor and handle feelings. The child is also working on cognitive skills, attending to the communication partner, or objects and activities, remembering, and the executive functions of planning, inhibiting, as well as problem solving. If the child has vision, he may be using gaze, recognition, discrimination of objects, people, and activities, as well as joint attention, sharing a gaze with another. The child may be using fine motor skills to point, reach, grasp, or pick up an item, and other eye-hand coordination skills. The child may also use gross motor skills to maintain an upright position, or a standing position, or balance, or move to a desired object, and to follow directions. So one of the items that I think is very important in thinking about communication skills is the Communication Bill of Rights. And this is developed by representatives from a variety of national organizations, the American Speech Language Hearing Association, for Augmentative and Alternative Communication, Association for the Persons with Severe Disabilities, with intellectual and developmental disabilities, deaf-blindness. And there's a great article by Brady in the references, so I refer you to that. The idea is that all people with a disability of any extent or severity have a basic right to affect through communication the conditions of their existence. And there are 15 rights listed. I'm going to go over just 9 of them because of our time and because of our focus today. So the first is to interact socially, maintain social closeness, and build relationships. Request desired objects, actions, events, and people. The right to refuse or reject undesired objects, actions, events, or choices. The right to express personal preferences and feelings, and the right to make choices from alternatives that are meaningful. We all need to have the right to make comments and share opinions. Children with CVI and other disabilities have the right to access interventions and supports that improve communication and to access functioning, augmentative, and alternative communication and other assistive technology, services, and devices at all times, not just at school. And the right to access environmental contexts, interactions, and opportunities that promote participation as full communication partners with other people, including peers. So the goal is self-determination and full belonging in our community. So let's think about how a child with CVI and multiple challenges communicates. Does the child communicate through body movements, tensing the body, moving the arms or legs, through facial expressions, grimacing, frowning, smiling, or through early sounds, grunts, babbles, coos? If the child has vision, does the child look at something or look away? Does the child use simple gestures like patting an object or moving an adult's hand towards the desired object? Or conventional gestures like pointing, reaching, waving goodbye, or vocalizations like uh-oh or uh-uh. Concrete symbols are those symbols that are tangible. The child can handle them. So is it a picture, an object, or something that's a homemade kind of symbol the child recognizes, a piece of an object? Or are they abstract symbols such as a sign, a manual sign, or a brailled word, or one word print, or a spoken word? Or does the child use 2 or more abstract symbols and so has language? Remember the last webinar, we talked about the importance of knowing how the child uses sensory information. Well, here, to think about what kinds of communication input is appropriate, how the child can receive communication, build her receptive language. We have to find out how the child uses available senses, vision, hearing, tactile, as well as kinesthetic or movement feedback. And then, is the input comprehensible? Figure ground. We know the issue of visual clutter. So if we're showing the child something or using visual communication, can the child see it? Or is there some visual clutter or other distractions? If we're using speech, can the child hear it, the signal? Or are there noises in the background, music or people talking that will be auditory clutter? Does the input match the child's ability? That is slow paced, short phrases. And is the input within a meaningful activity or context, so the child has all of these contextual clues? And do we use scaffolds or prompts to help the child understand the meaning of the input? So we have to understand also what means of communication the child with CVI can perceive and understand. So touch cues. So I'll give an example of asking a child to put on a shoe. So a touch cue might be touching the child's foot. An object cue might be showing the child the shoe. A tangible symbol, such as a picture of the shoe, might also help the child understand the message. Or you might use a gesture, like putting on your shoe, gesturing that movement. A vocalization to get the child's attention. Oh, or a manual sign, signing shoe on, or saying, get your shoe on. We also have to think about how we say things, auditory input. And today you also have the tips for practice for communication called Tips for Early Conversation, with some of the strategies we talked about last time. And you can see that auditory highlighting and some of the other strategies like the 4 S's really comes from the developmental work on parent-infant interactions. So the characteristics of motherese, parentese, child-directed speech, caregiver speech, infant-directed speech, there are all of these terms that mean the same thing. We know that these characteristics really attract young children's attention and help them understand what is being said. So use of a high pitch, repetition, repetition, exaggerated intonation, slow, melodic speech, and showing objects so that the child can get the meaning between what is said and what is meant. It's very concrete in the beginning. Dunst and his colleagues from the Center for Early Literacy Learning looked at many different studies of parents of hearing children and parents of deaf and hard of hearing children. And they identified motionese as an analogy to motherese. So this is a visual and tactile analogy. And it's a way of modifying gestures, actions, and signs with infants and toddlers. And this gets their attention and helps their understanding. So the characteristics are using attention getting, such as tapping, using physical contact, moving closer to the child or touching the child, having positive affect, smiling and enthusiasm, slowing the pace of signs and gestures, changing the range of motions of gestures, so making them larger, using objects for their actions. The example would be showing a child how to drink from a cup, or taking a little toy bunny and having it hop. Repetition of the gestures, and then also simplification of gestures and signs. So think about these characteristics as we interact with young children with CVI. Along with that, I wanted to talk about the use of key word signs. So it's just the use of manual signs, American Sign Language vocabulary, to highlight one or two key words in a spoken sentence. So this is different from so-called total communication or signing an entire sentence in American Sign Language or signed English while we speak. There's research on this with both hearing children with and without disabilities. And research shows their positive effects on speech and oral language development, and that the use of signs does not inhibit a child's speech potential. These are the benefits. They provide accessible language input so the child can see them or feel these signs. They have meaning because they're labeling specific actions, items, people. We repeat them. They slow our communication down so it's appropriate pacing. And it helps the child develop imitation. It's a means of communication output for the child, expressive communication that supports language development. Let's consider how to select keyword signs. For receptive communication or input, we have to think about family priorities. What are the parents' goals? How frequently will the family use keyword signs? And do they have access to learning them? What adaptations will they make? And what communication modes do they use to communicate with a child? Do they use speech as well as pictures or objects or touch cues? And then in terms of expressive communication using keyword signs, output. What is the motivation for the child? Is this means efficient for the child, given the motor ability? Does the child need physical assistance? And what communication modes does the child have within access or his repertoire? To select vocabulary, I have found that these are 5 different considerations. One is motivation. What does the child want to use? What is the function of the sign? Does the child need to use it? What is the complexity? Is it easy to make or produce that sign? Is it easy to understand its meaning because it's iconic? It looks like what it represents. And then what is the family culture and comfort level with the signs that are selected? So here are some examples of signs for keywords. More is motivating if the child wants more to eat or more music. It's important to use 2 words once the child has learned 1. More is also easy to use because it's a symmetrical movement and one hand touches the other hand. The other 2 signs you see here, and of course these are for children who like to eat, so not for children who NG tubes or children who dislike food or drink. Eat is also an easy sign to make because it touches the mouth. It's iconic. It looks like what it represents, as is the drink sign. It looks like you're drinking from a cup. Now, I did want to show you one sign that may be offensive, and there are others, to some families, depending on their cultural background. The T hand shape, which is the thumb between the middle finger and the index finger, is the potty sign, is an offensive gesture, like giving someone, the middle finger in our culture. So it's important to discuss manual signs as well as the manual alphabet with families and their meanings. We may also need to adapt these keyword signs for a child who has CVI and additional disabilities. Think about what will help the child perceive and understand them. Do we need to use coactive signs for when the child is expressing herself? That is a hand over hand approach to help the child understand how the sign is made. Do we need to use tactile signs? That is for interaction, for the child to receive a sign, hand under hand. Or does the child have sufficient vision so we can use visual signs? Then think about the distance from the child, how we position and place the sign we're using within the child's visual field. And then the size and the amount of movements, and how fast or how slowly, the rate or speed of the signs. Here is an example of a mother teaching a child the apple sign. So this child is motivated because she likes to eat apples. And the apple sign is actually the index finger bent and on the cheek twisted twice, apple, like the number of syllables. So I call this a visual sandwich because the mother is showing the child the sign in the top picture, and then she's helping the child produce the sign for apple using coactive signs. And then she is showing the child again the sign for apple so the child can imitate. So she's using vision, touch, and then vision. The communication matrix is an exceptional assessment tool. I hope many of you are familiar with it, and if not, I'm happy to introduce it to you. It's really for people who are just learning to communicate. And it can be used with children who have any form of communication. This is the practitioner or the professional tool, and there are also family or parent tools that can be gathered through interview, or the parent can fill it out. And you see the example here in English and Spanish. There's a large research base because it's been used widely with children with a variety of disabilities, including autism, CVI, deaf-blindness, developmental disabilities such as Down syndrome, and various neurological syndromes. Here are some of the advantages. It assesses expressive communication. It's very sensitive to child change because they're small increments, and so it demonstrates progress. It uses observation and interview. It's been used widely by speech-language pathologists, educators, other practitioners, parents, and they're both online and hard copies at very reasonable prices. The online copies are free, and next year there'll be a nominal charge if you use more than 5 a year. So the research base is there are articles on it. It's used both nationally and internationally, and because of that, there are many translations, as well as translations, especially in the parent versions, for the most common languages in the United States. It again, I want to emphasize this, will measure the expressive communication for children using a variety of communication means. So from body movements through augmentative communication. So this is not for a child who has language, either speech or signed communication, and is fluent in that. It's really for a child who is at the first 2 years of communicating. and it has 7 levels of early communication. These are the levels. First is pre-intentional or infant state, so just fussing, tensing the body, or being alert. Intentional communication functions, so making a request, a refusal, or being interested in social interaction. It identifies unconventional communication behaviors. Some of our children may tense or arch or grimace when they're really interested in something, and really that's a request. So it's unconventional and pre-symbolic. Or conventional communication behaviors such as gestures, pointing, making vocalizations, or use of concrete symbols such as pictures, objects, or abstract symbols such as single signs or single spoken words or bliss symbols, or language that is combining 2 or more symbols. I wanted to show you this because this is sort of the layout of the communication matrix. There will be on the left side the levels going from 1 to 7 that we just went over. And then across the top row, you'll see the 4 reasons to communicate. Refusal, I want something, social interaction, or request for information. Now, we're going to go through each of these in the next few slides. So these are reasons to communicate. First is to request, I don't want to do something, a refusal, to express discomfort, protest, refuse, or reject. So think about how children without words can express these. The second is, I want something. I want more of an action, or I want a different action. I want more of this object. I want to make a choice. I want a new object, or I want this thing that's not here, it's absent. So let's look at a few of these. There is research on how to teach a child to make a choice. And it comes from a variety of disability groups, including autism and those with children with visual impairment. So we can offer a child something that we know the child loves, high preference, the child will take it. Or we can offer something we know the child dislikes, the child rejects it, turns away. And then we can offer 2 items, something the child prefers and something that's a neutral preference, or a foil, something the child dislikes, and see how the child responds before we go on to items of equal preference or high preference. Here is an example of visual communication. So on the left side, you see a real banana, which is an object, a concrete object. And then we see some examples of concrete symbols, a picture of a banana, the printed word banana, and then the Braille word banana. So you can use a match to sample to teach this. So the child matches the banana to the picture banana. You might want to start with a large picture of the banana, so it's an exact match. On the right-hand side, you see this teacher is asking a child whether she wants a banana or an apple at snack time. And on the binder, the visual display, are 3 different pictures, an orange, banana, or apple, with the printed word and the Braille words. And the child is choosing the banana because that's her favorite. When a child has CVI, we have to consider the child's visual, motor, cognitive, and other skills. if we're using a visual display. So we need to think about the items selected for the display. How many of them? Is it just 1, 2, 3, or more? What are the characteristics of the items? How large they are, the colors. How are the items displayed? Are they vertically or horizontally? What about the spacing? Are they in a line, a vertical line, or a horizontal line? How much time does a child need to respond? That wait time. And how a child will use them to communicate. Will the child look, point, or take something and hand it to an adult? So let's look at 17-month-old Raina making a choice between a blue and a pink sippy cup. Watch how Raina recognizes the color blue and the differences between colors. She learned this through daily experiences, so her mother was the one who said, I think she knows blue. She recognizes the sippy cup. And in this video, you'll see Amanda Lewick's feet and hands, and you'll also hear her voice.
Which one do you want? This or this? Okay, she's pretty clearly wants this one.
Now we know that parents need to test this, or they do that. This much.
Where is it exactly? And she's definitely using her feet. Which one do you want? A lot. That's brand new, like as of last week. Literally. Really? Yep. That's wonderful. Like 10 days maybe. Not even when you were here last, I don't think she was using it as she's getting to know her body. Which one do you want? You pick one. Okay, thank you. I'll bring it to you. So
Okay. So the other reasons children communicate is to engage in social interactions, like requesting attention, showing affection, greeting people, offering and sharing, directing another's attention, and polite social forms. Thank you, please. And then the last function is to provide information, like answering yes or no questions, asking questions, naming people and things, and making comments. So we're going on to routines-based interventions. We know that they work from research because it's real life. It fits a family's lifestyle. There are multiple opportunities for learning in predictable, meaningful, and functional activities. They're natural reinforcers. The child does something to get something. And there are opportunities for generalization across activities and people. And it builds the caregiver and the teacher's confidence and competence. So in this topic, I want you to look at the strategies you see. Here's Joel. It's diaper time. So how many times does Joel hear the word diaper? And what outcomes are embedded?
How does a consistent routine prepare a child to be a more active learner?
Do you want to change your diaper? Do you want to change your diaper? Let's go get a diaper, okay? Go get a diaper. Oh, there they are. Yeah, give mommy a diaper. Good, you got a diaper. Ha, can you lay down? Sit down. Sit down. Sit down. Oh, you can just lay down that way. Okay. Yeah.
Joel's diaper routine. Use a touch cue and the spoken word diaper. Guide Joel to the diaper bag. Let Joel take out the diaper. Ask him to sit or lie down. How does a consistent routine prepare Joel to be a more active learner? When his parents use the same routine and the same words every time, he can begin to anticipate what's next. Knowing what's next helps him adjust to the change and not be startled by a sudden action. He can relax and enjoy the predictable repetition of their shared routine.
Now we're going to talk about steps to embed functional vision objectives and interventions within daily routines. And there are 4 steps. First, we have to gather information about daily activities. What happens during a typical day? What happens frequently? What activities does the child like and why? What activities are most enjoyable for the caregiver and why? What activities does the child dislike and why? And what activities are the most challenging for the caregiver and why? So that you can help problem solve. Then we determine learning opportunities to figure out when should we embed activities with learning opportunities. How can we use things that are preferred? And how can we make a challenging routine easier to complete? In thinking about how to embed functional vision interventions, we have to identify objectives that we'll focus on, or outcomes and objectives that will integrate multiple developmental domains, and to consider a matrix format that you will see if you're not familiar with the matrix format. And of course, we need to monitor and evaluate progress. How will we know if progress is being made or an objective is achieved? How do we track progress? And how is this working for the child and adults? So this is a really easy way just to make a little list with families or teachers of things the child likes, people, objects, and activities, and dislikes. And we want to know how they respond. In the list of references, there's a wonderful guide on child preference indicators by Jan Moss that's free and online. We can ask a variety of questions to find out how the child indicates, I like this, and what are high, low, and neutral preferences. What are the characteristics of things the child likes? What are the characteristics of things the child dislikes? And how do these characteristics relate to the child's use of sensory information? The objectives within routines matrix have many benefits, and it's used widely in early intervention and early childhood special education and some early intervention programs for children with visual impairments. It helps teams to plan and provides consistent learning opportunities across the day. It's a way for itinerant teachers and consultants to infuse strategies from their discipline. So it's for all service providers, and it helps family and practitioner collaboration. So data collection is also a possibility here. So I'm going to show you a routines-based objective matrix for a hypothetical 2-year-old with CVI and additional disabilities. So this mother wanted the child to look at her face and, of course, to reach and grasp objects, and we wanted the child to participate in turn-taking games. So those are the outcomes on the left side, and then across the top row you see the routines. And you might just have 1 or 2 outcomes or 1 or 2 routines, depending on the family situation. We put 3 here just to give you a better idea. So at playtime, the mother will hold a favorite toy across her face to entice looking and reaching. At bath time, she'll use slow animated facial expressions that the child can see. To help the child grasp, the mother will put finger food on a high contrast placemat on the high chair tray. And to facilitate turn-taking games, this mother will imitate the child's sounds and actions and wait for response. And at bath time, sing a song, eyes, ears, nose, and touch it. The child might put her face forward or start touching her nose herself. In this next example, it's a 5-year-old child with cerebral palsy and CVI, and she is in a full inclusion, a Head Start program with typical peers. And her educational team, the general educator, the teacher from the area of visual impairments, and the speech language pathologist, as well as her occupational therapist, decided a good objective would be for Zena to make a choice of items that are within her visual capabilities by looking at her preference or pressing her speech generating device. So at centers, which is the activity-based curriculum here, the teacher will place an object that represents a preferred activity and an activity that's a non-preferred one about 6 inches apart on a vertical black felt board on Zena's wheelchair tray, and ask her, what center do you want, math or art? And wait for her to look at the object of her choice. At recess, the teacher will ask a preferred pair to offer Zena a choice between playing together on the adaptive swing or at the sand table. They will use objects that Zena recognizes, a piece of a chain to represent the swing or a plastic shovel to represent the sandbox, and hold those objects apart in her visual field and viewing distance and wait for her to look at the choice. At lunchtime, ask Zena, are you hungry? Do you want to eat? Offer her a food choice that she can readily see and wait for her to press her speech generating device to indicate yes or no. So in this final conversation, we'll see Jack in a fully included preschool program playing red light, green light. So what strategies do you see? What objectives are embedded? And what adaptations support Jack's participation?
This video shows a classroom of preschoolers playing the game Red Light, Green Light. Jack, a boy with multiple disabilities, is sitting on his teacher's lap in the top left of the screen, using a voice output switch to lead the game. After the first round of play, you will see Jack next to his teacher in the lower left of the screen, scooting across the floor as he plays the game.
Come back in position. No. Yellow light. Green light, go. Red light, stop. Yeah, ready? Push it. Green light, go. Green light, go. Red light, stop. I need one special friend to help me push the switch. Would you like to push it? Okay. Ready? Green light, go. Red light, stop. Stop. Look at stop. Stop. Hey, what do you want? Green light, go. Go, 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 go. Go, go, go. Go, go, go. Green light, go. Go, go, go.
Parents, do we have any comments on this video?
Not yet, but I'll add one of my own. One of the things I love about this video is that I love how the teacher sets it up so that all the students are using the AAC device to prompt the whole class to engage in the game.
Right.
And I also like how all students are crawling to the red light, green light. That really seems very much like the teacher had thought about that beforehand and thought about how she could make that a very inclusive lesson for Jack.
Perfect. So there are opportunities to work on his communication, social interaction, motor, vision. There are lots of opportunities here. Good. Well, I know that we're out of time. So let me just say, I encourage people to go to the reference list. There are many things here, free downloads for you, and also the resource list. Because we've talked about some of these things, but there are certainly more for you to be able to access and get information. So thank you very much. I think we're out of time.